Noswaith dda bawb. Good evening, everyone. Croeso cynnes iawn I chi gyd i'r achlysau heno sy'n cael ei recordio. Nancy Edwards ydw I, Cadeirydd y Comisiwn Brenhinol Hynebion Cymru. Heno, rydyn ni'n falch iawn I lansio ein prosiect newydd, Prosiect Traftadaeth Asiaidd Cymru, a fydd yn dathlu ac yn archifo profiadau Asiaidd Ugandaidd yng Nghymru, gan gyfnodi yn arbennig lleoedd yng Nghymru sy'n bwysig iddyn nhw o safbwynt diwylliannol, crefyddol a hanesyddol. Bydd y prosiect yma yn cael ei arwain gan y gymuned a mae'n cael ei gyllido gan Llywodraeth Cymru yn rhan o raglen I sicrhau Cymru wrth hiliol. A very warm welcome to you all to this online event, which is being recorded. I am Nancy Edwards, Chair of the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales. Tonight, we are launching our new Welsh Asian Heritage Project, celebrating and archiving the experiences of Ugandan Asians who came to live in Wales. This community-led project, funded by the Anti-Racist Wales Culture, Heritage and Sport Fund as part of the Anti-Racist Wales programme, will celebrate and archive the experiences of Ugandan Asians in Wales, especially documenting important places of cultural, religious and historical significance. This project is very close to my own heart because from October 1972, at the age of 18, I spent 6 months as a community service volunteer at RAF Stradishall in Suffolk, welcoming and helping to resettle large numbers of traumatized Ugandan Asian refugees who had been expelled by Idi Amin. Cyn rwy'n gyflwyno y siaradwyr, rai pethau I wneud efo drefn. Before I introduce the speakers, a couple of organisational things. Firstly, you are welcome to ask questions or make comments at the end of all the talks. That's right at the very end. Please write your questions in the Q&A function, and we'd be grateful if you don't use the chat function for questions. This evening's talk is being recorded and shared on other platforms. For those not watching this live, you're also welcome to send us any questions or share your comments, and we will reply to them as soon as possible. Bydd y sgwrsiau heno trwy gyfrwng y Saesneg, cofiwch fod croeso I chi cysylltu â ni yn y Gymraeg yn y Comisiwn, os ydych chi'n ofyn cwestiynau neu adael sylw. So I want to now move on to the main business of the launch, if you like, a series of talks. And hoffwn dechrau y sgwrsiau heno gan cyflwyno Dawn Bowden AS, Dipri Weinidog a Celfydd y Dau Chwaraeon a Thwristiaeth sy'n wedi recordio neges I ni. I'd like to begin the launch this evening by introducing Dawn Bowden MS, Deputy Minister for Arts, Sport and Tourism, and we're delighted that she's been able to record a message for us about the project.
Noswaith dda bawb, good evening everybody. I'm especially pleased to be sending this message of support to the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historic Monuments of Wales for its work developing this superb project, celebrating and archiving the experiences of Ugandan Asians. Now, the historical narrative is identified in our Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan as a key area for action to deliver an anti-racist Wales. It's essential that our culture and heritage organisations reflect the experiences and histories of ethnic minority people in Wales, and I am committed to supporting them in delivering on this goal. The work presented this evening is a perfect example of how we can deliver, as the plan says, a balanced, authentic and decolonised account of the past, one that recognises both historical injustices and the positive contribution and impact of Black, Asian and minority ethnic people. I believe that sharing the stories of people who resettled here from Uganda will highlight the importance of our vision of Wales as a nation of sanctuary, and how delivering this vision will benefit all those who make Wales their home, both now and in years to come. So I'd like to thank all those involved for everything that you are doing to develop and deliver such an important piece of work. And I hope that you're enjoying working on the project as much as we will value and enjoy learning from it. I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful time this evening at what I'm sure will be an excellent event. Diolch yn fawr I chi.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much to the Deputy Minister. Ein ail sgwrs heno, hoffwn gyflwyno Christopher Catling, ysgrifennydd y Comisiwn Brenhinol Henebion Cymru, sy'n arwain y Comisiwn. Mae o'n mynd i cyflwyno y prosiect i chi a siarad rhywfaint am y gefnder mwy eang. For our second short talk, I'm very pleased to welcome Christopher Catling, the Secretary or CEO of the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales, who will introduce the project to you and say something about its wider context. Diolch yn fawr, thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. I'm well aware that not everybody knows the history of what happened in 1972, when Uganda's Asian community was unjustly expelled by Idi Amin. That's partly because the events were so traumatic for those involved that they have preferred not to talk about them. But we at the Commission believe that those events should not be forgotten, and that we should make sure the historical narrative is balanced and authentic, and that it reflects the experience of all communities in Wales. We should, to use the Deputy Minister's phrase, acknowledge past injustices, but also celebrate the positive outcomes, which in the case of Wales is very much about the enrichment of our cultural, social, economic and religious life as a result of those members of the Ugandan Asian community who chose to settle in Wales. So I'm going to recall the events of 1972, partly from a personal perspective, to use a phrase that you will often hear in the context of anti-racist activity. This is my lived experience. In 1972, I was a little bit younger than Nancy. I'd just completed my O-levels. I was enjoying a wonderful warm summer working as an archaeologist, as a volunteer excavating a Roman townhouse in my hometown of Cirencester. And we had portable radios on site to keep our minds occupied while doing some of the more mundane tasks involved in archaeology, shoveling and barrowing large amounts of soil. And that's how I learned early in August 1972 that Idi Amin, the controversial president of Uganda, had ordered the expulsion of the country's Asian residents, giving them just 90 days to leave the country. Now, young and idealistic people like me have a very strong sense of, as I was then, young and idealistic people as I was then, have a strong sense of natural justice, and we were shocked by what we heard. But worse still was the racist rhetoric that followed. Thinking back to 1972, to those dark days, you have to remember that this was the era of the National Front, founded in 1967, and the British movement of 1968. I'm ashamed to say there were skinheads, or bother boys as they like to be called, even on the streets of such quiet Cotswold market towns as Cirencester. And nearby Swindon was awash with gangs on a Saturday night looking for people to beat up if they'd got dark skin. Enoch Powell had made his infamous Rivers of Blood speech in 1968. I and many others were to study that speech when we returned to school to begin our A-levels in September 1972 as part of a very enlightened general studies A-level that we did back then. And we were all able to analyse Enoch Powell's speech for all its loaded statements and twisted facts. Politicians of all parties came out of this very badly. 10 years previously, in 1962, Jim Callaghan, the Home Secretary, had introduced the Commonwealth Immigrants Act, This imposed stringent restrictions on the entry of Commonwealth citizens into the United Kingdom, a measure designed specifically to limit the number of Asians holding British passports who were fleeing from racism and persecution in Kenya. There were many voices in the UK in 1972 who argued that we should not allow Ugandan Asians to come to this country. But it's to the eternal credit of Ted Heath that he took a stand in the teeth of right-wing opposition to make the UK a safe haven for Ugandan Asians. He set up the Uganda Resettlement Board and later wrote in his memoir, "We did what any civilized nation should do." Departing Asians were allowed to take a small amount of money, US dollars 120, something like that, and a small suitcase with them. Everything else was confiscated. The assets of 5,655 businesses, people's homes, all their contents, bank accounts, cars, and jewellery. In order to bring home to people what that was like, Jyoti Ramji, our community engagement officer for this project, challenged young visitors to our stand at the 2023 Eisteddfod. She asked, if you could only pack one small suitcase with your most precious possessions, what would you take? To young people today, the idea of losing a mobile phone or a gaming terminal or a family pet or a favourite toy was something that they found very difficult to contemplate. But of course, we didn't tell them the whole story. Even the few precious possessions that departing Asians took to the airport were often snatched away by looting soldiers who seemed to think that the suitcases of fleeing refugees would be stuffed with money, jewellery and gold. Many of those who fled to the UK were grateful just to escape with their lives. To put this in some sort of perspective, there were some 27,200 Ugandan Asians who found a new home in the UK. 6,000 more went to Canada, 4,500 joined families in India, and 2,500 in Pakistan. To put that in perspective, 72,000 people sought asylum in the UK in 2020. So that's almost double the number last year, double the total number of Ugandan Asians who came here. And it's 2.6 times the number of Ugandan Asians who came to, that's double the total number of Ugandan Asian refugees who went to various parts of the world, and 2.6 times the number who came to the UK. And of those, 1,000 bewildered and traumatized families arrived in North Wales in the autumn of 1972 to be accommodated at the disused military base at Tonfanai. Some 700 arrived at Tonfanai station in the rain late at night on the 13th of October 1972, having endured a long flight and an 8-hour journey from a holding centre in London. A further 800 Ugandan Asians arrived by train over the course of November, and smaller numbers came in following months. In all, about 1,700 people came to Wales, about 6.3% of all those expelled from Uganda. Most arrived penniless, with nothing but the clothes they wore from the journey from Uganda, most unsuitable for the Welsh climate. Many of them have spoken about the warmth of the reception they received on arrival at Tonfanai. Community volunteers have done their best to make the camp habitable, to collect clothing for the new arrivals, to provide food. And in the following weeks, classrooms were set up and local teachers volunteered to help children prepare for their forthcoming O-levels. It's a tribute to their resilience that so many of those who had been forced to leave their homes in Uganda not only passed those exams, many of them got top grades. And it's that spirit of resilience that's been a great gift to Wales and to the UK as a whole. To continue with my personal story for a while, at university, 3 years later, we students had two big political causes. Anti-apartheid was one of them, and student activists campaigned to persuade their peers not to bank with Barclays as a tactic for persuading the bank to pull out of South Africa, something the bank finally did in 1986. The other campaign was more local to Cambridge. The Cambridge Students' Union did its utmost to publicise the fact that the government and the media seemed to want to ignore that supplies of luxury goods were being flown on a weekly basis out of the privately owned Cambridge airport to keep Idi Amin in his sybaritic lifestyle, even though technically there was a strict embargo on trade with Uganda. But while Idi Amin was being fed on a diet of champagne and caviar in Uganda, we students were being fed by Ugandan Asians who set up shops in Hills Road, Cambridge, that were open all hours of the day and night. And the University Gourmet Society made a rare foray into the darkest depths of the city suburbs to sample novel dishes at the newly opened Curry Queen restaurant, still going strong, I am pleased to say, and having just celebrated its 50th anniversary. Now, I don't want for a moment to suggest that all-night shops and curry restaurants are the lens through which Welsh Asian heritage should be viewed. Quite the contrary. But I'm citing those as examples of the way that Welsh Asians began almost as soon as they arrived to change our nation 50 years ago. And since then, Welsh Asians have made a substantial contribution to the economic, social, religious, and cultural life of Wales and the UK. Despite the fears of many back in 1972, there have been no negative consequences of opening the doors to Uganda's Asians. Nothing whatever has been lost, and a huge amount has been gained. Welsh Asian heritage has not been gained at the expense of something else. It's an addition, a new ingredient in the rich mix that we call cultural heritage. And that fact has not been recognised often enough by organisations like the Royal Commission. That we are responsible, it says in our royal warrant, for recording constructions connected with or illustrative of the culture, civilization, and conditions of the life of the people in Wales from the earliest times. So it's not just the heritage sector that's not aware of the events of 50 years ago. The children and grandchildren of Ugandan Asians are not always aware of what their elders experienced. And so with that in mind, the Royal Commission hopes over the next 18 months to record the life stories of at least some of those people who made a new home here in Wales 50 years ago. Heritage is a notoriously difficult concept to pin down, though it's a term we use quite frequently. It describes those things we inherit from the past that we regard as important enough to want to remember, to protect, to record, and to pass on to future generations. It consists of life stories, lived experiences, as well as artifacts, buildings, monuments, and landscapes. We no longer restrict our definition of heritage to buildings that are deemed by experts to have architectural or historical significance. We also have great regard for evidential value, community value, and associative value, all of which are very relevant to this project. And neither do we restrict our concepts of heritage any longer to the very old, meaning pre-19th century. My organisation increasingly focuses on 20th century heritage that is 2 or more generations old, which thinking about it, probably means that I'm a heritage object, since that definition takes in much of the 1960s and 70s when I was a teenager and student. So as part of the project that's being launched today, we'll record life stories, but we'll also record the places that feature in those stories. For example, the remains of the settlement camp at Tonfanau, the places of worship, homes, shops, restaurants, schools, and places of work. We'll be guided by members of the Welsh Asian community in recording the places they consider most resonant and significant to them. And we're planning to show the results at an exhibition towards the end of the project in 2024. I hope that this will be a voyage of discovery to find out whether there is such a thing as Welsh Asian heritage, and if so, what it looks and feels like. I think it'll be a very joyous and exciting journey, even if it has its roots in an act of inhumanity, the expulsion of Ugandan Asians in 1972. And I also hope that it will set the template for many future projects to celebrate the cultures of people who found a home in Wales from other parts of the world. 2025, for example, will see the 50th anniversary of the diaspora of the so-called Vietnamese boat people. And already in the course of this project, we've encountered people from Sudan and from Afghanistan who have asked if we would record their story. And there are undoubtedly many further stories to be told by refugees from Iran, Iraq, Syria, not to mention the long-established communities in Wales of people of Black, Middle Eastern or Far Eastern origin or from mainland Europe, such as Italy, Cyprus, Greece and Turkey. So it's a very exciting project that we're launching today, and I look forward to reporting back to everybody at regular intervals between now over the next 18 months on the progress that we're making with the project.
Diolch yn fawr iawn am cyflwyno y prosiect a hefyd I siarad tipyn bach am beth oeddech chi'n neud yn y 70au a clywed am Asiaidd Uganda yn cyrraedd. Thank you very much indeed for Christopher for introducing the project and its context and saying a little bit about how you discovered yourself that the Ugandan Asians were going to arrive in Britain in autumn 1972. I now want to move on to our main speakers tonight, who are going to discuss Ugandan Asians now and then. Rwy'n falch iawn rwan I gael y gyfle I croesawu Chandrika Joshi a I Neith Nikita sy'n mynd I sgwrsio am eisiau Uganda rwan ac yn y gorffennol. Chandrika Joshi is a writer, storyteller, and Hindu priestess. She came from Uganda at the age of 14 to the camp at Tonfanau near Tywyn. Following resettlement to the South Wales Valleys, she attended Ferndale Comprehensive School, followed by a degree in dentistry at the Welsh National School of Medicine and Dentistry in Cardiff. She has spoken extensively about the personal trauma of forced migration, belonging, and creating a home. Her niece, Nikita Joshi, was born in the UK to parents who came to Wales as children in 1972. She studied biomedical science at Cardiff University and dentistry at the University of Central Lancashire. She actively supports the charity Papyrus UK, which works to prevent suicide in young people. She enjoys painting, writing, and heavy metal music. So over to you.
Nikita?
Hello, thank you very much for that introduction. Shall we kick things off by asking Chandrika, what was your life like in Uganda?
Looking back, I would say that my life was a happy life. I had a sense of belonging. I lived in a country which was sunny and, very, there were no, it's equatorial. So, we don't have seasons. We didn't really have seasons. And I lived in a very small village, so I knew everyone. And anytime you needed help or whatever, you'd knock on someone's door and say, I'm doing this, that, and the other. Would you please give advice? What can we do? So, and I would just looking back, I would say that, we didn't really have this working class, middle class that we have in this country. But if you equate that, then I would say that we were like middle class, sort of. And the reason I say that is because my father could afford the school fees, and my father could afford medical bills and school fees, etc. And that meant that we were comfortable. Yeah. So a really good life. Yeah.
And what do you think that your identity was like when you were in Uganda?
Well, I identified myself as Indian because I followed Indian culture, so to speak. So my first language was Gujarati because that's what I was taught by my mother. And I was taught how to read and write Gujarati before I even started school. So I listened to Bollywood music, and so and followed Hinduism. So a lot of, I would say, identity in Uganda felt, but it was different. So although I say Indian, Indian is not homogeneous, just because someone is from India or you give yourself an identity. Even when I give myself an label to say I'm a Ugandan Asians, we are not a homogeneous group of people because everyone has an individual identity, depending on their gender, depending on sexual preference, religion they want to practice or not practice. So identity is a really complex thing. But as a as a youngster in Uganda, I wanted to be westernized because, and by westernized, I would say that even something simple as having short hair, because I could not get my mother to agree that I could cut my hair. That's right, not like you. So I could not get my mother to agree that I could have short hair. And because everyone had long hair, most people, I desperately wanted short hair, right? And, we loved wearing our 60s very short dresses and things. And at the same time, when there was a religious festival or something, then we got dressed in a sari. Yeah. So, yeah. But sorry, I want to say something, but I had a sense of belonging. I think belonging is much more important than identity. I had a sense of belonging. I looked at that as my home. My parents had never taken us to India. In fact, even my parents had only been to India, I would say, twice since they emigrated. And I'm talking about they emigrated when they were about 18 old. My dad in 1930s and my mum in 1940s. So, and they hadn't, and they used to talk, I used to listen to my parents talk about themselves, that how they have changed, and they, when they go to India, find it difficult because they're no longer fit into that group. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you something now. I mean, you are born in this country. So what is your identity?
So I think I feel like I've never really belonged anywhere. You spoke about identity and the sense of belonging somewhere. And I felt like I've never quite fit into any category. It's either I'm not quite Indian enough, or I'm second generation African, or I'm not quite British enough, and I sort of am a mixed pot. But I think that can go one of two ways, really. It's either that I don't fit in anywhere, or that I fit in everywhere, which is the approach that I've taken. And I think specifically in my job as a dentist, I can relate to lots of different people because of being such a mixed pot and having such a rich heritage and culture. It's easy for people to relate. And now that I've moved to the Midlands, especially, it's nice your ears pick up when you hear that somebody's from Wales and where they are, and it's just something that you can connect to people with.
I feel a sense of sadness, really, that you say that you don't, because what you are describing is the way I felt. So, and when I was your age or slightly a year older than you, I went traveling back. I went back to Africa. I went to India because I really wanted a sense of belonging. And eventually I sort of told myself that there are two parts. Either you belong everywhere, you see yourself as belonging everywhere, or you see yourself as, not belonging anywhere. So at that stage, even I had told myself that really all the boundaries are man-made, and in reality, I belong everywhere. But I would say that worked for that time when I was that age and busy with my career. It does come back. I mean, I hope it doesn't come back to you, but it did come back to haunt me, that this lack of this feeling of not belonging. Yeah.
I think as I grow and become older as well, I'm becoming more and more interested in things in history, family history and culture, and moving away from Wales as well. I find that, I mean, my Welsh is appalling. It's not great, but I find that I'm wanting to speak more Welsh, just being away from home, and my sense of identity is becoming greater day by day. Okay, so what was it like being expelled from your home? What happened?
You know, I would say that we just felt stunned. But as children, we felt stunned. You couldn't really fathom it as to, what's going on in your life. And, your sort of world unraveled. And, it was a difficult time. However, if I look back now, I think that my parents had, and other Ugandan nations had already started getting worried when Idi Amin came to power, because the year Idi Amin came to power is the third time my parents went to India. And I get a feeling that they probably went to India to sound it out, to say, if we have to leave, where are we going to go? Because, like I said, they'd left India like a long time ago. So my parents had gone when Amin came to power to India. And when we were expelled, my father was adamant that he would wait and come here until, he was going to wait, when my mother was very much like, let's just go to India, it's fine, we'll just try to make a life there now. And my mother never really, always told us to say, you must make trips to India, you must go and buy a house there, because when they expel you from Britain, where are you going to go? So India will always take you back, so you must do that. So my mother always talked in those terms, Yeah, so yeah, it was difficult when we were, it was a difficult time. You can just see, you can just imagine if something horrible is going to happen in Cardiff, and we are all told to say that you've got to leave suddenly and leave everything behind and all your friends behind and just move. It's a crazy situation, Yeah.
And what was it like traveling to the UK?
Well, the whole process of the whole build-up, the 3 months, August, Amin had announced, and September, October, we left in October. So what I'm grateful for I'm not answering your question, but I've got a thought in my head, so I'm going to share that. What I'm grateful for is the fact that my parents had this sense of finding a very distant relative who lived in London, and they started sending parcels of things that we might need when we come here. I'm only talking about things you need to live, and like blankets and towels and things like that, because and that really, I only realized that last year, when I thought, my God, right? I remember when we were housed and, came, we had nothing, but we had these parcels, we had our utensils, our spices, we had our blankets, we had a lot of things. We even sent steel glasses and steel plates and things like that, so we've got something to eat from, So looking back, I just say, and of course my dad's books, right? So I think the best thing we brought were my dad's books, right? So that gives me a lot of solace. But yeah, so the question was, what was the journey like? Yeah, so the journey was traumatic. That it was just scary all throughout, because the taxi we were waiting for didn't come, and we had to quickly, ask around and say, well, we need a taxi, we've got a flight. And then on the way, of course, this horrible, angry army sort of personnel stopping us and checking all of our bags, and everything, so yeah. And there are things that I personally don't remember, but like your dad, who is of course my brother, younger than me, said about, we were in a bus being transferred, and he said you were screaming on top of your head, right? Like having a fit, because my father was going to follow later, and I was just really terrified that something's going to happen to him and we're not going to see him again. So but that sort of course my memory was totally blocked. I didn't recall that, so yeah, so the whole journey was traumatic. And even sort of once we got there, sitting outside in that hot sun, there was no shelter anywhere, with our bags waiting, for hours on end. And then we had brought, cassava chips and Mogo crisps and stuff like that, and having to leave that behind. And, when we were in the camp, we talked about those, food items which we left at the airport, because we missed our food so much, So yes, I think the journey was traumatic to get up to. Once we were in the plane, we felt like a sense of relief that we're going to be okay. Yeah.
And at that point, before you left Uganda, did you feel like that was still your home? Or did you feel like it wasn't your home any longer? Or did you feel like
yeah,
under attack? How
the thought never, once we were asked to leave, the thought of what is home never occurred. In fact, it didn't even occur in Tonvanai or where do I belong? That sort of, or who am I, was only sort of once we were given a house to live in and started settling and going to school, etc. And I think the shock probably came when I realized that there's a whole aspect of my culture or who I am, which I have no one to share with. So I think that was, that was a real shock. And I was then 14, 15, that sort of age. So initially it was all very well, because now I could wear all these fashionable clothes, and not that my father had any money, but superficial as I was, it was like, I can put a bit of makeup on or whatever, but it slowly sort of settled. And then it was like, I can't share the music that I used to listen to, the dances, the poetry, the language. And that was a shock. And I had very long hair, and all my friends in my school kept on telling me at one stage to say, oh, why don't you have it cut now? Nice little page boy, because that was what everyone had. And I associated long hair with my identity now, so that is really clear, that how a 13-year-old or 12-year-old, 13-year-old wanted her hair really cut short. And then when the chance came and the parents were willing to, my mother would have said, yeah, okay, if you want it cut, right? But I told my friends no, because I'm not going to cut my hair. So I actually kept my hair long until I was your age. 30 was the first time. When I was 30, that was the first time I had my hair cut. And but I saw that as part of my identity,
Yeah, that seems to be a running theme, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't as rebellious as you are. I wouldn't shave a bit off, and quite frankly, in those days when I was at dental school, that would not have been accepted. There were black skirts and white blouses, and not like your generation. I've been in sort of another dental school when I was working, where someone had pink hair, and I thought I would have been sent home if I ever had pink hair. those, those days. Yeah.
So what was the most difficult thing about leaving to you?
Actually, the most difficult thing was not leaving. The most difficult thing was making a home here. It wasn't, leaving was just like you are in a flood, right? So to speak. So, you see yourself like a, little block of wood which is just going along the river wherever the river's taking it, because I just had no control over it. The most difficult period was really feeling that my life has ended, so to speak. I mean, it was as, I think teenage years are difficult as it is, right? But it was really a huge identity crisis. And like, where do I belong? It's like, I'm so angry. By the time I was 16, 17, I was, furious with the circumstance. Yeah, that I would say that was a really difficult time, and of course, we lived in Penrith, and all my friends were in either Ferndale or Mardy, because the school was in Mardy, although it was called Ferndale Comprehensive School. And living in Penrith, and there was no one from my year or my class or anywhere near. I think there was no one in Penrith. So that totally isolated me, in the sense that I found it, I couldn't do anything with anyone really. So that then totally made me lonely and isolated. And, I started walking on my own on the hills opposite the house. And then I was always angry again because, I was brought up to say you can't go wandering around on your own as a girl because you may get attacked. So though that feeling was always there, and I resented that that I would have just liked to have just walked and hiked on my own to walk off all these frustrations, but couldn't do that either. Yeah. So yeah, I would say those 5 years until 1978, I would say hard time. Yeah. For me, emotionally and personally, it was a really hard time. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like quite a contrast between that and having a community on your doorstep and sharing your food with your neighbors, and really having a very busy, vibrant life, to all of a sudden being isolated somewhere.
And also, like, when I say that there's no one to, in Uganda, you would ask, so what would happen is that when I did, there were no secondary schools in my town. So either people took a taxi and traveled back and forth. It was an hour's drive to the neighboring town to go to secondary school, or myself and my sister were boarded. We went to Kampala to school, and we boarded there. And so what happens is that even when people are making those decisions, you have friends and other people who have made those choices. And I think humans are like a group animal. You learn from each other, and that's how you survive. And not having that in this country in the early years was really difficult. I'd say it was very difficult for my parents, because although both my parents had studied some English as children, which is surprising sometimes, but they had. But you know what, it's like, if I went to Italy now, even though I've nearly completed the Duolingo course, I wouldn't straight away understand if someone's having this conversation in Italian, right? So my parents found it difficult so that meant that the children's roles are reversed, and you became someone who is making or helping make big decisions, like schooling, you know, and I was 14 or 15 when I went to organize my younger sibling schools, you know. So and then it leaves you with regret that maybe you didn't do things right or correctly. So at 21, I was organizing the secondary schools, and I always, every time I walk around Lanishan, my parents lived in Pentwyn, which is quite far. And me, in my wisdom or lack of it, put my siblings in a school in Lanishan. And I drive past there now and I think, my God, they were so young. They would have had to change 2 to 3 buses to go to school every day. But these are the decisions you make when you're young, you know, you're not quite, and not having that peer group of similar people who you go to and talk to and say, oh, what did you do? And, you know, yeah.
Is there anything that you miss the most? What would you look back on and think, I miss that the most about living in Uganda?
I used to think that, well, I definitely miss the sunshine, right? I mean, I cannot say that strong enough, because I do miss the sun, because I am really a tropical person, so to speak. But I do miss, I used to think that I missed, the flowers and the fruits and the whatever. But I've come to an understanding now that really, when I thought I'm missing Uganda, what I was really missing was the stability my family had, right? So in Uganda, my family was very stable. We were all doing well at school. My parents were okay, although my father had become disabled. They were, like I said, we all had older sort of people we knew we would go and ask advice from. But as a home, we were in a really loving, stable family. And our life were totally different in this country, because, as you know, my mother became very ill, had a nervous breakdown. My dad, found it difficult to walk around because of the hills, etc. Neither of them could work, and money, went from being comfortable, to having nothing, and I remember my brother writing to me, your dad writing to me when I'd gone to do sort of a course in London. It must have been 77 or 78, and he wrote to me to say, we have a fridge now, because we didn't have a fridge. We used to put our milk in a cold water or leave it outside in the winter or something like that, because of course you have to wait until you can, my dad saved enough money for us to buy a fridge, so so the missing really was more about that loving, stable family you felt you can rely on, who would be there, and the lack of it, and realizing that constantly being scared that someone's going to die. And that was really traumatic for all myself and my siblings, because both my parents just needed a lot of healthcare needs, right? So yeah.
What was the camp like? What was Tonvanai camp like?
Well, Tonvanai camp, and I think that they made a huge effort, and it was lovely, like the schooling and everything. They had organized, activities for us, schools for us. But again, as a 14-year-old, I just found it difficult. I found it, there was one boy, probably about 16, who would shout my name every time I went out. And I'd never had that kind of catcalling or whatever, because anyone from the village, if they did that, their father would probably beat him up or something, you know. They just would not be allowed, right? That wouldn't be respectable enough. So I just found it like threatening to an extent. And then there were older youngsters. They formed a group of youngsters, like a gang. And I know someone we know who was from the same village as us, and he was beaten up and stuff like that. So I also recall these fears, you know, these threats that suddenly, you know, everything was so harmonious and stable in life. And now we are here living out of our suitcase, my mother in a hospital, my father unable to walk, and we're living in this place which you know, was sometimes threatening, you know. But saying that, you know, the school, you know, I think what was really good is they organized these, you know, they organized our time very quickly. So we were placed in a camp school. So you had this routine when you would go to the school and come back. And myself and a group of other people, I would say there were about 10 of us or 8 of us, were placed in Tawin Grammar. So, you know, that was really exciting, because now I was going to meet all these white people I wanted to befriend. And yeah, so Tawin Grammar, yeah, so that was good, yeah.
And then you talked a little bit about your life in Penrith. Did you find that changed, that attitude and that feeling of living there? What was it like, sort of living there?
Penrith is a small, you know, Rhondda, in those time, only sort of work people had were coal mines, you know. So, you know, it's not particularly sort of like a wealthy sort of place. And some people who were given houses near Penrith, like Tylerstown, etc., left within a month, because they went to the job center and said they're looking for jobs, and they were told, well, there are not many jobs around. And they just felt like, well, what would we do? You know, I came across someone last month when I went to the funeral of one of our neighbors in Penrith, another Ugandan Asian, and I met these people who said, well, we left within a month, because we thought, if there are no jobs, you know, what are we going to do here? You know, so people made, when they were of working age, they made decisions to say, well, we don't have to have a council house. We'll just get a private house, rent it, and then we will start from scratch. We'll get jobs, because everyone knew that only way to get out of poverty would be to work or so the jobs were really important, you know. Yeah, so Penrith was, neighbors were really friendly, really grateful to the neighbors, because my mum was home from the hospital now, and they used to keep an eye on her, take her to Tupperware parties and all those bits and pieces. And of course, this family, the second family who we became very close to, the Ugandan Asians, right? So they were living there. And yeah, we became really close to them, you know. And in fact, for the first time tonight, one of their sons, who was friends with my youngest brother, Jitu, he's coming to my house for dinner tonight, right? So he's coming for the first time in all these years, and they left Penrith in 1979. The fact that we had these few homes to go to, so we would go and listen to their records, or we would have bought some Bollywood records, and they would have, and we would exchange and listen to them, was good, you know. But another thing which was good was the school. So I was in Ferndale grammar at that stage, but became comprehensive later. So the headmaster was, I think of him often, actually. He was absolutely wonderful. He just so wanted to make us feel welcome and feel part of that, we belong there. We have every right of being there as anyone else. He gave me extra English lessons, and one of the nicest things I remember he did was the first year we were there at Christmas time, when we have a Christmas concert, he asked me, would I and my sister, etc., wanted to do anything from our own culture for that. And so we did this dance, right? It's folk dance. And so I think the school was really welcoming, the school, the headmaster, etc. It was fantastic. Yeah, they were good.
Would you go back to Uganda? Would you want to go
I
back?
would like to go, but that's only because that I'm writing sort of, I'm writing now sort of based on life, and I would just like to go there once at least to feel what it feels like. I mean, I've asked your dad, but he doesn't want to go. He said he has a very romantic image of Uganda in his head, and he knows that it won't be like that, and he doesn't want that destroyed. For me, I just want to smell the smells and see the colors and hear the birds, or probably I'll hear trucks and traffic noises, because it probably is, developed to that extent. So yes, I would like to go. Yeah.
And we talked about your identity before you left. Do you feel like your identity has changed? Or what is your identity now?
I would say my identity, I mean, I still follow to an extent Indian culture, but it's not totally, things that I would have not done when I was new to this country, I have now blended in, so to speak, that I've changed. You sort of, you grow these little tentacles, these little roots, and you adapt to the culture around you, just like the way my parents had adapted to living in Africa by enjoying matoke and cassava and all that kind of Ugandan foods they'd never eaten in India. I've also adapted to Wales, but I would say that my identity is probably still it's mixed, it's Indian. I do ask myself every now and then that, would I call myself Welsh? And in some forms that I fill, I would write down Welsh rather than I have a sense of belonging now, which I didn't have. And that's been a journey of 20 years where I had to do a lot of work on myself and feel that I belong. This is my home, and I do have this strong sense of belonging, that I do belong here, even though I speak other language. I don't speak Welsh actually, because I did French at school, but even though I don't speak the language, I feel like this is my home. So I've started, in fact, I was at Literature Wales last week. I started a project which is These Are the Hills of Home, where I said that I would walk in different places of Wales and paste my mythological stories from my culture onto the land, which is Wales. And I like that these are the hills from home, because as you know, as a storyteller, I tell a lot of Indian mythology, and but I love Welsh mythology as well. I love Mabinogi and all that, right? Yeah.
No, I
So, can I ask you, what's your, how do you feel your identity, or have you already covered that?
yeah, I think we already covered it earlier, but I think I feel like I fit in. I'm at the moment. I feel like I fit in everywhere. Whereas when I was younger, I didn't feel like I fitted in anywhere. I think it's changing more. As the roots are growing, I feel like as I'm learning over time that I fit in everywhere, which is nice.
Yeah, I just want to ask you as a last question, have you encountered racism? Because you are born here, so I want to know whether you've encountered racism at all.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I have. Even sort of maybe sometimes it's not racism, sometimes it's more ignorance, and fear of the unknown. But yes, I've encountered racism, even sort of being in university, with my job, when I was in primary school, when I was in high school. I've encountered things like, for example, when I was in university, I remember we had a class and there was 3 brown people in that class. And it just so happened that those 3 brown people were always picked on. And one of my friends actually suffered quite badly with that. He felt so degraded and belittled that he suffered from panic attacks. He was made to feel very small. He was almost made to feel like he was failing his exams, and it felt obviously quite clear to everybody that there was something not right there. Yeah.
I didn't encounter it in school. You know, I you know, I was different anyway. They knew I was different because I'd come from another country. So there's no point in, you know, hiding that. But I did encounter it at university when I was in dental school, and that was the first really blatant racism, you know, where people in power, you know, one of the lecturers constantly, I was the only brown person in my whole class, right, in dental school. And there was one lecturer particularly who constantly picked on me by opening up bottles of eugenol and saying, have a smell, this will remind you of home. Or he even had the audacity to speak to me at a later stage and said, what's wrong with you? What do you think is so special about you? Because when I pick on other brown girls, they don't say boo to a cat, right? And why do you think you've got an answer to everything? And so I was just like so blatant, and you're so scared to challenge it in those days. Because as you know, dentistry is one of those professions where, you know, someone, you cut a cavity and someone looks at a cavity, and if they want to turn around and say you are useless at cutting cavities, it's there because you filled the hole, there's no one else, a third person can't see it, it's only between you and them. So people can sort of you know, I was always scared that I wouldn't qualify, or, you know, I would have problems. Yeah. So I think that to have that level of fear, and I come across it now with other sort of Ugandan Asians, and when we've been discussing recently about racism and their children face in schools or colleges. And I just feel really sad that sense of fear, you know, that if I complain now, they will hound me, or somehow I'll lose my university space. Or I just hope things change, you know, because quite frankly, people like myself now, in my peer groups, I don't come across it, I don't come across racism because I'm in this art world where everyone's a bit left-wing, and it's great. And but when I listen to some people's stories, I do feel sometimes that a lot needs to be done still. How are we doing for time?
I think I'm very grateful. I think we ought to move on because well, diolch yn fawr iawn rannu ag profiadau a siarad am Uganda a dod I Brydain. And thank you very much indeed for sharing your experiences of Uganda, of Britain, and indeed of racism. And I think this shows why the project is so important. I'd like to now move on to our final speaker, Hoffwn rŵan cyflwyno ein siaradwraig ola Parminder Dhillon, sy'n wedi ymuno efo y Comisiwn Brenhinol I arwain y project yma. I would now like to introduce our last speaker, Parminder Dhillon, who will be leading this Royal Commission project. She has worked across all sectors as an equality training consultant and delivered several national race equality programmes. Parminder is passionate about oral history and describes herself as a serial archivist. Born in Kenya, she made rural Wales her home 22 years ago.
Can I first start by saying thank you so much, Chandrika and Nikita. You demonstrated profoundly what this project is about by sharing your personal memories, your stories, and what it feels like to be thinking about home and looking at one's culture and heritage. So you succinctly demonstrated what this project is about. Thank you. And can I say, Noswasdar, good evening, Pranam, Namaskar, Assalamu Alaikum, Sat Sri Akal, Habari, and Jambo to everyone who's joined us today to support the launch of this project. So thank you very much. I'm not going to be sharing any personal stories except to say that I'm personally delighted to bring my East African heritage to this project. Everything that Chandrika, Nikita, and Christopher said resonated with my experiences of 70s and 80s. I also want to share that this is a very much a team effort from the Royal Commission to deliver this project. We have commitment right from the top, from our CEO, Christopher Catling, to all the colleagues across all of the Commission who will go that extra mile and are superly committed to ensuring the success of this project. So we are very excited, very enthusiastic, and we are going to make sure that we actually work in a co-production way to make this project happen. You've heard the background to how the Ugandan nations were expelled, so I'm not going to go through it. I'm just going to very simply take you through what the project is going to be all about. So the project is about people telling stories, just like Chandrika and second generation, asking their first generation about their experiences. So we want to know how many people actually came to Tonvanai, because there's differences in numbers, how many stayed and made Wales their home, how many went to other places in the UK. We also want to know how many Ugandan nations came from other camps to settle in Wales. How many East African Asians, like myself, migrated to Wales as a direct result of the events in Uganda. So we want to actually create a whole picture of that experience. By hearing personal stories, we want to celebrate the difficult journey from expulsion to resilience, whatever that resilience may mean for people. This will form part of an archive for the present and future generations, and will also include how the landscape of Wales has been changed by places of cultural, religious, and historic significance. By focusing on one community, we're really telling the stories of many. By focusing on Ugandan Asians, we're looking at Wales then and Wales now, as Chandrika and Nikita demonstrated in their conversation for us today. Co-production and partnership working is critical for the project. We have started to engage with communities and with people with lived experience, many of whom are present here today. We will continue to work with all local communities from all faiths, cultures, and languages. You can be involved in the project in many ways. Firstly, by sharing your personal stories. We want to actively seek out those seldom heard voices and give them a platform. You can become a volunteer with the project. We would like volunteers to work on all aspects of the project with us, interviewing and recording oral histories, helping with archiving and supporting the documentation of cultural, religious, and historically significant places. We will provide training for all the volunteers. This will help us build greater community engagement between communities and the Commission, but it will also contribute to skill enhancement of all involved. We welcome well-being practitioner volunteers, as we would like to support participants as they tell their stories and the trauma that raises for them. We also would welcome community contact volunteers who would act as a focal point for the project, engaging us to the local community, especially in remote rural areas, and engaging the community with the project, and more importantly and more widely with the rest of the Commission's work. Creatives, local artists, photographers, filmmakers, tell, remanage, and build vibrant displays for the national and touring exhibitions. A broader engagement with the project will be the community of interest. Through monthly seminars and talks, we want to create a forum to debate wider issues. For example, how did some East African Asian women lead some of the well-known strikes for workers' rights? What was the political context within which the Ugandan expulsion took place? And what are the consequences and lessons for us today? We will include a fuller picture of the Tonvanai camp as part of the archive by looking at how local communities had stepped up to help and support the new arrivals. It was extremely heartening to hear these stories from people who visited our stall at the Stanford in August this year, giving us plenty of personal stories and promises of old photographs. The oral histories and the mapping and the recording of buildings and spaces will form part of the National Monuments Record of Wales and the People's Collection Wales to be available for present and future generations. We are seeking partnerships, in particular with museums and exhibition spaces, to help us to mount a national exhibition as well as a touring one that we would actually take around Wales, particularly to remote places. We also are seeking advisors to help us shape and develop the project as it moves forward. Each element of the project, as you can see from the PowerPoint slide, will help us to deliver Wales Anti-Racist Action Plan by reflecting the diversity of our heritage. So in summary, the Welsh Asian Heritage Project is a multi-layered project. It's a role for everyone to be involved. I invite you to register your interest, and if you have any questions, we'll be pleased to answer them. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Perminda, am y sgwrs yna i esbonio y prosiect i ni. Rhaid i ni symud ymlaen now. First, thank you very much, Perminda, for sharing what the project is going to do. And in the final few minutes, I'd like to ask all our speakers to put on their video, their video again, so we can have questions. And I'm going to hand over to David Thomas. Hoffwn rŵan cyflwyno David Thomas o Comisiwn Brenhinol sy'n mynd i cyflwyno ag sylwadau am y prosiect a chwestiynau i ein siaradwyr a siaradwrygydd heno. Finally, I want to hand over to David Thomas, the Head of Public Services in the Royal Commission, who will introduce your comments and questions for speakers, which I hope you have been putting in the question and answer box.
Diolch yn fawr, Nancy. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions. The first one, I think, is probably one for Chandrika from Russell, and it says, I work with an organisation called Sporting Heritage that supports effort to preserve and celebrate sporting heritage collections in Wales. I wondered to what extent people from Uganda brought with them their favourite sports to Wales or set up clubs of their own. It seems like it might be an overlooked area of our national sporting heritage.
I would say that probably areas in the country where Ugandan Asians had sort of made their homes. There are many, many Ugandan Asians had lived, like Leicester. They probably would have started their cricket teams, and as you know, cricket is absolutely the national sport in India, right? So even in Uganda, I think people sort of played cricket and volleyball and stuff like that. But badminton was again one of the sports which was very, we played it at school in championships and things. So for people, sports were overlooked, absolutely. What happens is that when you are surviving from day to day and trying really hard to make a life, sort of sport doesn't come in, so I think it's a shame, but I think in Leicester, Birmingham, those kind of big places, they probably did create their own teams and carried on, but I'm not aware of any of that sort of in Wales.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a sort of a message from Beth Evans, who says that Beth is a Ferndale girl, so it was good to hear that you had that your experience of Ferndale Grammar was a positive one. And then she comments that her mother was headmistress in Penarese Juniors, probably around the time you and your siblings were there. So it's very pleased to hear that your experience at Penarese was positive. So
that's lovely.
So I don't know whether you knew the person there. And then a couple more questions then. Just first of all, Kieran asks about how do we get in touch with the project for any engagement. So I guess that's one for Perminda.
Yes, I think you'll now find links being dropped into the chat. You can get in touch with the project. After this, you will receive a feedback form, but also an invitation to actually become involved with the project. But just to give you the email address, wah@Royal Commission, rcahw.gov.uk. It's going to be dropped into the chat box. But
yeah,
please...
and we'll have a slide up at the end as well, which will give contact details and so on. Then question from Nina, and who's asking around about the communication from the projects, and will there be a series of seminars and talks online or in the community?
Yes, that is the intention. The intention is there would be monthly seminars and talks, but there would be many community engagement events, hopefully, in co-production and in partnership with local communities.
Okay. And this one, the next one is I would like to ask Chandrika what her hopes are for this project and what she would like to see it achieve.
Well, my hopes are, I think it's going the right way. I'm really pleased that, you know, this project is happening. My hopes would be that, you know, as well as when monthly seminars are organized, as well as celebrating the culture that Ugandan Asians practice, it would be great to even look at things like getting a speaker to talk about the traumas that forced migration leaves with people, and that kind of, because that would help even the other people who, you know, come to this country seeking refuge. So it would apply to anyone who has, like, example currently is the Ukraine situation, that what does forced migration do to you, and what help can we give these people? So that kind of things I would love to see, as well as, of course, you know, as well as the cultural things that we celebrate the cultures of Uganda, the culture that the Ugandan Asian people belong to. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a question from Ashar, well, more of a comment actually, but many congratulations on this very much needed project, and it's important to learn from history. The current displacement of people continues. A brief comment to reassure Nikita, who talked about dental schools. He has spent many years in England looking at how we challenge racism in medical and dental education. So interesting comment there. I've got one question as well, actually, which is around the end of when you moved away from Tonvanai, and was there a conscious decision to move, to stay within Wales, or was it a decision that was made for you, or what really? What was the process?
So I think one of the problems we had was we were a large family. So I had six siblings, my aunt. So we were about 8 or 9 people, and they were finding it difficult to find us a house big enough for a home big enough. And the camp was going to close, and my mother was in Machynlleth. My mother was in the hospital in Wales. So my father basically just said he didn't want to move to another camp and wait for a big house. He just said, we'll accept anything, next house available, and that was in Penrith. And they wanted to, at that stage, it was like, we want to stay local because my mother was in a hospital in Wales. So my parents accepted, my father accepted the house in Penrith.
Great, very much. We've got one last comment here now, and it's a comment aimed at Perminder, and Anita said it's absolutely brilliant to see Perminder leading this. So that's a good vote of confidence of you. Great, thank you very much for that. Okay, Grant, I've seen that Nicola has dropped some information into the chat as well. So if you'd like to look at that, but I'll hand back over to Nancy now.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, David. Ar y diwedd, just hoffwn diolch unwaith eto i'r holl siaradwyr heno, a hyd gyd am dod i lansiad. Dwi wedi dysgu lot fy hunain, achos o'n i'n ifanc iawn, really, pan o'n i'n gweithio efo Eisiaid Uganda. A dwi ddim wedi cadw mewn cysylltiad tan blwyddyn diwetha. O'n i'n cael fy gofyn i ymuno efo Ugandan Asians at 50. I'd just like to thank once again all our speakers for talking so brilliantly about their experiences and about the project, and also all of you who've logged into this event. I think it's brought home to me, I was very young when I worked as a community service volunteer at Stradashaw, and it did I think, affect me for the rest of my life. It was a life-changing experience, and I grew up very fast as a result of it. And I think I haven't really, because of the course of my own career, engaged with Ugandan Asians over until last year, when I was invited to take part in the Ugandan Asian at 50 project. And I'm very much looking forward to the results and to sharing, having the opportunity to share it, to hear the lived experiences of the Ugandan Asian population of Wales. Diolch yn fawr iawn and nos da. And good night.
you